Have you ever wondered what life was really like for a soldier during the war? We're not just talking about the battles, the gunfire or the explosions that usually come to mind. What happened in between, how they cope with the cold, hunger, or even homesickness. Imagine spending days in the trenches without knowing if the next dawn would be your last. Today, we're going to explore behind the scenes of the war, revealing details and curiosities that often go unnoticed. From improvised strategies to survive boredom to the extreme hardships of everyday life, you'll discover that the life of a soldier was much more than weapons and battles. And who knows, you might ask yourself, would I have the strength to face those challenges? Stay with me, because what you're hearing or listening to will change the way you see the soldiers in history. During the Second World War, food played a crucial role in maintaining the morale and physical capacity of soldiers on the battlefield. However, ensuring that troops received food regularly and adequately was a monumental logistical challenge. The nature of military operations, often carried out in extreme conditions and in remote locations, made the distribution of supplies a fundamental aspect of war strategies. The armies involved in the conflict developed different solutions to deal with these difficulties. For example, the United States introduced K and C rations designed to be light, nutritious, and easy to transport. The K ration, intended for short-term missions, included items such as cookies, chocolate, canned meat, and instant drinks. The C ration, aimed at longer combat situations, offered a slightly more varied menu with canned soups and dehydrated fruit. Both were packaged to withstand adverse conditions and could be consumed without the need for elaborate preparation. In Germany, troops relied on rations known as Eisenportionen, iron portions, which contained items such as black bread, canned meat, and concentrated soups. However, as the war dragged on and the country's resources became scarcer, the quality and quantity of food provided to the soldiers decreased dramatically. In extreme situations, troops were forced to resort to gathering local food or even eating roots and herbs in order to survive. The Soviet Red Army faced even greater challenges. Soviet rations were often rudimentary and insufficient, consisting mainly of bread, potatoes, and cabbage soup. In prolonged campaigns or during sieges, such as that of Leningrad, hunger became a cruel reality for the combatants. Even so, the resilience of the troops was a determining factor in the Soviet resistance. Food also played a symbolic role on the battlefield. The act of sharing food between comrades strengthened the bonds of solidarity and helped maintain the fighting spirit. In some cases, troops improvised ways to improve their meals, using local ingredients or exchanging items with allies. For example, British soldiers, known for their rations of tea and cookies, often swapped with the Americans, who had access to treats such as chewing gum and chocolates. However, it wasn't just the soldiers who faced food challenges. The civilian population, often caught in the crossfire, also suffered from food shortages and government-imposed rationing. In some occupied regions, hunger was used as a weapon of war, further exacerbating human suffering. In short, food on the battlefield during the Second World War was a reflection of the extreme conditions of the conflict. From ingenious solutions to provide ready-made rations to moments of absolute deprivation, food was closely linked to survival, morale, and the dynamics of military operations. These aspects highlight how food logistics was an essential component in shaping the course of the war. Translated with dpel.com free version. The Second World War was marked by a routine of physical and psychological exhaustion for soldiers and civilians. Despite the hardships, entertainment and leisure played a crucial role in relieving stress and keeping morale high, both on the battlefronts and in the support regions. Leisure on the battlefield. For soldiers, moments of rest were rare but highly valued. During breaks in the fighting, leisure took many forms. Card games, dice, and improvised boards were common. They were portable forms of entertainment that required little space and could be easily organized among the soldiers. Music. Many soldiers carried portable instruments, such as harmonicas or guitars, to play during rest periods. Music acted as an emotional outlet and a way of remembering home. Improvised sports. Football, baseball, or cricket were organized when conditions allowed. A makeshift ball or even helmets could serve as accessories for the matches. The Christmas Truce of 1914. Although it doesn't belong directly to the Second World War, the Christmas Truce of 1914, which took place in the First World War, remains a powerful symbol of humanity in times of war and is often mentioned in reflections on later conflicts. During this historic event, German and British soldiers, facing each other in the trenches of the Western Front, ceased hostilities on Christmas Eve. They sang Christmas carols, exchanged impromptu gifts such as cigarettes and chocolates, and even played soccer matches in no man's land. Although brief, the truce showed how leisure and gestures of camaraderie can emerge even in the darkest times. Inspiring stories and tales of hope for future wars, including the Second World War, shows and live performances. Organizing performances was a strategy used by many nations to boost troop morale. Military bands. These were common both in training camps and on the battlefronts. They played military marches, popular tunes, and even local songs to entertain the troops. Celebrity visits. Artists and celebrities, such as singer Vera Lynn in the United Kingdom or comedians from the USO, United Service Organizations in the United States, made tours to perform for the soldiers. These visits often included musical shows, plays, and humorous performances. Improvised theater. When professionals were not available, the soldiers themselves organized plays or comic skits, often with improvised resources. Cinema and radio. Cinema and radio were essential leisure tools during the war, both for soldiers and civilians. Films in the field. Film screenings were organized whenever possible. In military camps, sheets or tent walls were used as movie screens. Comedy, action, and romance films were the most popular, bringing a bit of normality to the hostile environment. Portable radio. For the soldiers, radios were a constant source of entertainment. They listened to news, music broadcasts, and humorous programs. Some specific broadcasts were made for the troops, such as the Command Performance Program in the United States. Propaganda disguised as entertainment. Films and radio programs often mix leisure with motivational or ideological messages, reinforcing the morale and objectives of the nations at war. Entertainment for civilians. In the countries involved in the war, civilians also sought forms of leisure to relieve the tensions of the conflict. Dance clubs and live music. Even during the bombings, nightclubs and dance halls continued to operate in many cities, offering a moment of escape. Local sports. Games and sports competitions continued to be organized, often with substitute players due to the absence of professional athletes at the front. Reading. Books and magazines were widely used as a form of distraction. Despite the adversities, leisure during the Second World War was an essential tool for maintaining emotional resilience, creating moments of humanity and hope in the midst of chaos. Translated with dpel.com free version. During the Second World War, hygiene and health-related challenges were critical factors for both soldiers and civilian populations. In a conflict of global proportions, maintaining good health was essential to guarantee the troops' fighting capacity and minimize the impact of adverse conditions in war-affected regions. However, the precariousness of living conditions and the limitations of medicine at the time resulted in considerable challenges. Hygiene on the battlefield. Soldiers' personal hygiene was often neglected due to the extreme circumstances of military operations. Lack of clean water. Limited access to drinking water made it difficult to carry out basic activities, such as regular bathing or washing clothes. This contributed to the proliferation of skin diseases such as dermatitis and fungal infections. Parasite infestations. Lice and fleas were common problems among soldiers, causing discomfort and spreading diseases such as typhus. Inadequate sanitation. Makeshift latrines were used on the front lines, but often lacked proper waste treatment, which contaminated the soil and water. Diseases and epidemics. The war created perfect conditions for the spread of disease. Malaria and dengue fever. In tropical regions such as the Pacific and Southeast Asia, disease-transmitting mosquitoes thrived. Armies used mosquito nets and repellents to mitigate the risks, but not always successfully. Diarrhea and dysentery. Caused by ingesting contaminated water and food, these conditions weakened troops and often resulted in high mortality rates. Tuberculosis. Crowding in trenches and shelters facilitated the transmission of respiratory diseases such as tuberculosis. Medical advances and disease control. Despite the challenges, the Second World War also spurred significant advances in the field of health. Penicillin. Discovered shortly before the war, penicillin was widely produced and used to treat bacterial infections, saving countless lives. Vaccines. Mass vaccination campaigns were carried out to prevent outbreaks of diseases, such as typhoid fever and smallpox. Mobile medical units. Field hospitals and highly trained medical teams accompanied the troops to offer rapid treatment to the wounded and sick. Hygiene and health of the civilian population. Civilians also face poor hygiene conditions and serious health risks. Rationing of essential goods. Hygiene products, such as soap and toothpaste, were scarce due to rationing and the prioritization of supplies for the armies. Bombing and displacement. Air raids destroyed sanitation infrastructure, leaving entire populations without access to drinking water and sewage. Concentration camps. In these facilities, unsanitary conditions and malnutrition were deliberately used as part of extermination policies. Resilience and adaptation. Despite the adverse conditions, both soldiers and civilians found ways to cope with the challenges. Hygiene initiatives. Military officers encouraged personal cleanliness practices and regularly inspected the conditions of camps and shelters. Community efforts. Civilian populations banded together to clean streets, treat water, and prevent disease outbreaks. Health education. Information campaigns were carried out to teach basic prevention measures, such as washing hands and boiling water. In short, the Second World War exposed the fragility of health conditions in times of conflict, but also catalyzed important medical and sanitation advances. These efforts not only saved lives, but also laid the foundations for improvements in medicine and public health in the following decades. Translated with dpel.com free version. The Second World War was not just a clash of armies, but an experience of permanent psychological tension for soldiers and civilians. The conflict transformed everyday life into an emotional battlefield, marked by fear, uncertainty, and the need to survive at any cost. Life in constant tension shaped generations and left a deep mark on human history. Soldiers' tension at the front. For soldiers, tension was a constant companion. Every moment on the battlefield was a mixture of adrenaline and fear. Invisible threats. The possibility of enemy air attacks, bombardments, or ambushes kept the soldiers in an almost non-stop state of alert. Mental fatigue. The incessant sound of gunfire, explosions, and screams created an environment where rest was almost impossible. Many soldiers suffered from sleep disorders and extreme exhaustion. Emotional challenges. The brutal and sudden loss of comrades was a devastating experience. Separation from families and uncertainty about the future fueled feelings of despair and loneliness. Psychological disorders. Many combatants developed what was then called war neurosis, now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder (PTSD). Uncontrollable tremors, flashbacks, and panic attacks were common. The reality of civilians in conflict areas. For civilians, everyday life was transformed by a constant state of tension. Bombings and shelters. In cities like London, Berlin, and Tokyo, anti-aircraft alarms were the sound of routine. Entire families ran to underground shelters, where they spent hours or days fearing for their homes and lives. Rationing and shortages. The lack of food, fuel, and essential goods forced people to queue endlessly, trade items on the black market, and improvise to survive. Separation and loss. Parents, children, and spouses were sent to fight or fled conflict zones, often without knowing if they would ever meet again. The disappearance of loved ones became a painful reality. Tension in the occupied zones. In territories occupied by foreign armies, tension reached unbearable levels. Constant fear of reprisals. Resistance to the occupiers was punished with brutality. Public executions. The destruction of entire villages and arbitrary arrests were commonplace. Surveillance and snitches. Civilians lived under the watchful eye of enemy patrols and had to be careful of neighbors or acquaintances who might report them. Survival conditions. Many were forced into slave labor or to live hidden in forests, mountains, or secret houses, as happened to Jewish families persecuted by the Nazis. Resistance and hope. Despite adversity, the human spirit found ways to resist the constant tension. Community support. Solidarity networks help distribute food, medicine, and vital information, offering comfort in the midst of chaos. Culture and art. Even under occupation, music, theater, and literature continued to be created, bringing moments of relief and cultural resistance. Small acts of disobedience. From sabotaging train lines to hiding persecuted people, many civilians risked their lives to fight against oppression. The psychological legacy of the feared war. The constant tension left deep aftereffects. Many veterans and civilians suffered psychological trauma for years, while others found post-war reconstruction a way to overcome painful memories. Stories of courage, sacrifice, and humanity in times of tension are remembered to this day as testimony to the impact the war had on all aspects of life. Life in constant tension during the Second World War was a period of pain and suffering, but also of resilience and hope. Between the fear of the present and the uncertainty of the future, men and women showed the strength of the human spirit in the face of one of the greatest tragedies in history. Despite all the difficulties, the soldiers' daily lives were not all suffering. They found ways to survive, to create bonds, and to maintain hope, even in the midst of chaos. What did you find most surprising about the soldiers' daily lives? Leave a comment now that you know a little more about the routine of soldiers and wars. Share your opinion. Which of these curiosities did you find most interesting? Could you bear to live through such a chaotic routine? We want to know